What you're seeing here is US President Trump greeting Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara. But why do we refer to him as Ahmed al-Shara instead of Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, as we've previously known him? We'll explain shortly. The second image shows Prince Mohammed bin Salman reassuring President Ahmed al-Shara that everything is in order. It is President Trump himself who is granting you international legitimacy in front of the entire world. Now, you are a legitimate president, just like any leader of any country across the globe. This next image features Prince Mohammed bin Salman thanking President Trump after he announced lifting all American sanctions on Syria. These sanctions were imposed during the reign of the ousted Syrian president Bashar al-Assad. This image is significant for one key reason. Saudi Arabia is the primary country responsible for lifting sanctions on Syria, not any other country. Why is that? Because if the UAE or Qatar had lifted the sanctions on Syria, Trump would have declared the decision to lift the sanctions from either the UAE or Qatar. He has praised and lauded Prince Mohammed bin Salman, then said that it was thanks to him and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan that the sanctions were lifted. But what stands out now, perhaps more than anything else, is this image. It shows President Ahmed al-Shara expressing his gratitude to the world leaders who contributed to stabilizing Syria and lifting sanctions on its people. Who did President Ahmed al-Shara thank? He thanked nearly all the Arab heads of state and monarchs whom he had once called for the overthrow of and accused of being American agents. Al-Jolani once explicitly stated that the Gulf monarchs were nothing but American agents. And why? Because they sought to preserve their thrones and ensure their continued rule. He also noted that the Egyptian military needed to be dismantled and collapse. Why? He answered that if the Egyptian military fell and the jihadists seized power, they would then be able to liberate Jerusalem. And finally, this image shows the ground assault launched by Israel on the Gaza Strip following Trump's visit to the Gulf. This implies that the Gulf states never spoke to Trump about the Gaza war at all. Does this mean that the Gulf states have abandoned Gaza? If so, why did they pay Trump $3 trillion? What was the return on that? Here come the important questions. What made Saudi Arabia so determined to support al-Jolani or Ahmed al-Shara? Why does it want to solidify his rule in Syria at any cost and by any means? How did Abu Muhammad al-Jolani himself transform from al-Jolani into Ahmed al-Shara? Why did he abandon his idea of dismantling the Egyptian army to the point where he specifically thanked Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in his speech? Who is Abu Muhammad al-Jolani? What is his connection to ISIS and Al-Qaeda? How, in the Sesti Siwar past, did he fight and wage jihad to liberate Jerusalem and the Syrian Golan Heights, and today he is building a tower for US President Donald Trump in the heart of Syria? The most pressing question of all: why didn't Trump mention Egypt even once during his visit to the Gulf? Has Egypt been reduced to such insignificance? These are the crucial questions. Now, let's answer them. After assuming power and the fall of Bashar al-Assad, al-Jolani was left with two options. The first option was to hold onto his jihadist ideology, which focused on liberating Jerusalem and dismantling all Arab armies, viewing them only as forces meant to protect their rulers. The second option was to abandon his jihadist ideology to gain the favor of Israel and the US, thereby securing international legitimacy to continue ruling. Al-Jolani chose to abandon his jihadist ideology and offered full allegiance to both the US and Israel. 4. What purpose? To gain international legitimacy that would allow him to continue his rule. But here lies the problem. Al-Jolani, or Ahmed al-Shara, as he has decided to rename himself, originally choosing the name Mohammed al-Jolani. This name, therefore, isn't an insult, as some might think. It was a name he chose himself. The simple truth is that he wants to erase the period of his affiliation with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Jabhat al-Nusra from his history. What matters most to him is erasing that part of his past. In an interview, al-Jolani explicitly stated that it wasn't President Sisi who overthrew President Mohamed Morsi, but rather the United States, which used Sisi to achieve its aims. Also, al-Jolani traveled to Saudi Arabia to meet with President Trump, to greet him, and plead with him to accept all of his terms in exchange for lifting the sanctions and granting him international legitimacy. Later, Trump arrogantly declared in front of the public that he had decided to lift the sanctions on Syria, thanks to the efforts of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. The letter al-Jolani read to thank all the Arab heads of state, starting with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who just a few years ago had been accused of being a coup leader, wanting to overthrow him and dismantle the Egyptian military. Suddenly, we find al-Jolani abandoning all of this and thanking President Sisi, claiming that he saw in his eyes love for the Syrian people and concern for Syria's future. But here's the question: did al-Jolani write this letter? Or was it written? For him, al-Jolani made several grammatical mistakes while reading the letter, as if he were seeing it for the first time. It's impossible that he wrote it himself. So, who wrote it? Most likely, it was written by Saudi Arabia as a gesture to appease the Arab countries that had opposed al-Jolani's rise to power in Syria, considering him a terrorist linked to extremist organizations. The main countries that opposed al-Jolani included Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, and others. Thus, al-Jolani had no choice but to thank them all, almost as if seeking their approval for his continued rule by restoring relations with them. You may ask, what's the problem with all of this? The issue is that al-Jolani has undermined the credibility of jihadist movements. People no longer trust jihadists, realizing that the promises of liberating Jerusalem, eradicating Israel, and fighting the United States have lost all value. When al-Jolani came to power, he didn't just change his name. He abandoned the core ideals of jihad, including the fight for Jerusalem and against Israel, all to maintain his power. Let's move on to the following question. What makes Saudi Arabia go to great lengths to spend over $1 trillion and secure the largest arms deal in history with Trump? All of this to lift sanctions on Syria and agree to recognize Abu Mohammed al-Jolani. What does Saudi Arabia stand to gain from this? Striking a fatal blow to Iran. Under Bashar al-Assad's regime, Iran was expanding its influence through militias, with Hezbollah being the most important one, using these groups to attack the interests of the Gulf states. But what happened now? Once Bashar al-Assad fell, Iran lost Syria, and consequently lost Lebanon and Hezbollah. If Iran removes Ahmed al-Shara, it could regain control of Syria as it did under Bashar al-Assad. The continued rule of Ahmed al-Shara benefits Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, which is why Saudi Arabia is working to maintain his power. Saudi Arabia transformed al-Jolani, once an emerging terrorist figure in organizations like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, into Ahmed al-Shara, who sat down with US President Donald Trump in the same meeting room, shook his hand, and posed for pictures with him in front of cameras. All of this was financed by whom? Is Saudi Arabia financed it? Some might say, yes, but we heard Trump describe al-Jolani as a hero, strong, charismatic, and a great man. Does this mean al-Jolani or Ahmed al-Shara is a good person? I'll say, let's shift the perspective. Imagine, if Trump had said about al-Jolani that he was a terrorist, a villain, and unfit to be president. How could he sit with him and lift sanctions? That doesn't make sense. So, the idea that Trump calls him a great man and claims he will make Syria great again is logical and natural. Trump could not say anything else about him. Otherwise, how could they grant him international legitimacy? Some might argue, but even if we disagree with him, al-Jolani has been fighting the United States his whole life. Let's think about those words rationally. When al-Jolani entered Syria, who was he fighting? When al-Jolani entered Syria, was he fighting Iran, the United States, or Israel? When Bashar al-Assad fell and Iran was expelled, which was their common enemy with both the United States and Israel? Did al-Jolani continue his jihad against the United States and Israel? Or did he say, "That's it, thanks, I'm not fighting anymore"? Let me share two details that have not happened yet, but the course of events suggests they will happen. We don't have any information or claim to predict the future, but we'll share an analysis of the unfolding events with you. Please subscribe to stay up to date with our deep dives. Syria will normalize relations with Israel, and al-Jolani, or Ahmed al-Shara, will be the one to return the body of the Israeli spy, Eli Cohen, to Israel. Wait a little longer, and in the coming period, we'll be together and see if this happens. As for the shift in al-Jolani's agenda, we can see that it benefits the Gulf states. Al-Jolani has shifted away from his terrorist agenda and now seeks Egypt's approval. He went from calling President Sisi the coup leader to describing him as a president who loves Syria. Al-Jolani, who once aimed to dismantle the Egyptian army, arrested one of his men for insulting Egypt's military and President Sisi. Similarly, he once labeled Gulf monarchs as American agents, but later handed over Abdul Rahman al-Qaradawi to the UAE, leading to his capture and transfer. The biggest shift came when al-Jolani turned toward Israel, refusing to confront it militarily. He allowed Israel to occupy the Golan Heights buffer zone, then Mount Sheikh, and eventually all of southern Syria. Even as Israeli tanks neared Damascus and missiles hit the presidential palace, al-Jolani did not respond or fight back. All of these were concessions al-Jolani made to show that he had changed from Abu Muhammad al-Jolani to Ahmed al-Shara, proving that he abandoned his jihadist ideology and showing that the agenda of liberating the Golan and Jerusalem was an old, expired one. Has President Ahmed al-Shara's problems ended? The answer is no. He still faces several obstacles that he must overcome. The first obstacle for Ahmed al-Shara is normalizing relations with Israel. Convincing the Syrian people to accept this is challenging, as President Hafez al-Assad once stated that normalizing ties would lead to his own assassination by his presidential guard. Additionally, when President Sadat attempted to convince Assad to join the peace treaty for the return of the Golan Heights, the Syrian military wanted to shoot down Sadat's plane. This raises the question, how will Ahmed al-Shara overcome this issue? The second problem is that one of the American conditions is the expulsion of foreign fighters from the Syrian army. Dear viewer, you need to know that before Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was dismantled, it included fighters from the Turkestan Islamic Party, fighters from the Caucasus, and fighters from Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, and other countries. These fighters were entering Syria through the Turkish border under the guise of tourism. During Syria's war, Turkey sent tourist trips to northern Syria, which were actually foreign fighters joining Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Turkey was aware of, approved, and even encouraged this as part of its support for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, with tourist visas being a tool for this support. So, what's the problem with expelling the foreign fighters from Syria now? There are two problems with expelling foreign fighters, not just one. The first problem is that these fighters have been placed in leadership positions within the Syrian army as a reward for their participation in the fight against Bashar al-Assad's regime, Hezbollah, and Iran. The second problem is that if these fighters are expelled from Syria, they have nowhere else to go. Most of these fighters have fled their countries due to judicial sentences against them for being deemed extremists or terrorists. And here comes the question, how will Ahmed al-Shara deal with this issue? He has three possible solutions, not just one. The first solution is for Ahmed al-Shara to frame the situation as a jihad, claiming that leaving Syria is part of the struggle to support the country and stabilize Sunni rule against the Shiites. This approach would help him meet the American condition of expelling foreign fighters. The second solution is to grant them Syrian citizenship, while completely removing them from the army. This means he will give them Syrian citizenship so that they can live in Syria, but he would exclude them from the military to please the United States. The third solution is to allow foreign fighters to remain in their current positions until retirement, while committing to the US that no new foreign fighters will be recruited into the Syrian army. Essentially, it acknowledges the past appointments, but ensures no future foreign recruits. The third and most dangerous issue facing Ahmed al-Shara is the situation in southern Syria. What will he do about Israel, which has occupied southern Syria? Dear viewer, you've witnessed the occupation of southern Syria, the bombing near the presidential palace, the annexation of the Golan Heights by Israel, and al-Shara's agreement to all of Trump's conditions in Saudi Arabia. If you still expect al-Shara to liberate Syria from Israel through war, you need to reconsider your perspective. The only real possibility for Israel to leave Syria would be if Israel itself decides to withdraw. Let's address the final point, the $3 trillion the Gulf states paid Trump. Some people criticize the Gulf states and say, what a waste of money, while others say, everyone is free to spend their money as they wish. So, what's the story? I'll give you 2 points. The first point is that Gulf leaders are not easily manipulated, particularly in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. They have transformed their countries from desert regions into global hubs for tourism and investment. Cities, like Dubai and Riyadh, are unique, attracting foreign investment and tourism. It's naive to think these leaders would waste their money or let Trump take advantage of them. The answer is no. Don't think with your emotions. So, what happened? What happened is that a country like Saudi Arabia controlled the choice of the Syrian president and stabilized his rule with $1 trillion in investments. Saudi Arabia bought Syria's governance with $1 trillion, but not in the form of a bribe under the table or money that was gone without return. No, these were investments. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, and even Qatar used these funds to buy products in return, such as weapons, aircraft, and technology. The important thing is that they received tangible products in exchange for this money. By the way, regarding the technology issue, many people dismiss it, saying, "What's this?" The UAE and Saudi Arabia are investing in artificial intelligence. Look at how they're wasting their money. The wealthiest people in the world today are those investing in artificial intelligence. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are investing their money in AI technology, which is the future technology. So, what did a country like Saudi Arabia do today? It paid $1 trillion to the US in exchange for investments, technology, weapons, and most importantly, control over the reshaping of the Middle East in a way that allows it to protect its interests and national security. You must realize that Saudi Arabia bought Syria with the $1 trillion they paid to Trump. Do you know what it means to buy Syria's governance for $1 trillion? No, you're not just buying a country. You're breaking Iran with $1 trillion, denying Iran access to Syria with $1 trillion. And to repeat, the country that benefits most from Iran losing Syria is the Gulf states. For a simple reason. The Gulf states are the ones most affected by Iran's militias, like the Houthi militia. Today, when Iran loses the war in Syria, who wins the war? The Gulf states won the war without firing a single shot at Iran. So, are you upset that Saudi Arabia or the UAE paid $1 trillion to win the battle against Iran? What is $1 trillion worth if it helps you win the war against Iran? Nothing. You would have spent that money anyway if you were going to fight Iran. This is the case for Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But what about Qatar? Why is it paying all this money? Qatar needs protection, even from the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Here, let's revisit the statement from the King of Kuwait when he said he had successfully prevented a military move to invade Qatar. So, the question arises, if the United States is not protecting Qatar, then who will? No one. Therefore, when you calculate the $1 trillion Qatar paid to the United States for its protection, you'll find that the amount is not that large. What is $1 trillion compared to protecting Qatar from a military invasion? So, the Gulf states are not throwing their money away. They know exactly what they're paying for, who they're paying, and what they'll receive in return. Here's the tough question. Why hasn't Egypt appeared in the picture? Why didn't Trump mention Egypt even once during his visit to the Gulf? Does Egypt not have enough power to make Trump visit? Does Egypt not have enough power to make Trump speak about it? I'll tell you, on the contrary, Egypt is powerful enough that Trump cannot pressure or ask anything from it. That's why he didn't visit and didn't mention Egypt. Does Egypt need anyone to protect it? No. Egypt is capable of defending itself. Does Egypt need to install a president here or there to protect its national security? That's not the case. Egypt has rejected every request from Trump since he took office, whether it was requests for mass displacement, free passage through the Suez Canal, or even a visit from President Sisi to the US. Even the visit itself, Sisi rejected. Trump visits those who pay for protection. He goes to those who need investments. He goes to those who never say no to his demands. So, here's the question. Who benefited from the Gulf money paid to Trump? Did the Gulf states benefit from Trump? Or did Trump benefit from the Gulf states?